This is Wrestledope on YouTube. Subscribe to the channel, youtube.com/the Wrestledope. Now, this year's Hall of Fame is coming in just a few days' time when we've recorded this, and there's one name that's been omitted that I think both of us have always hoped to see in there: James Johnston, the man behind the music in WWE.
If I could just have a word into Vince's ear, maybe a short phone call, or maybe a one-on-one. It's never going to happen. But one person I would definitely be saying, hey man, listen, you got to put this guy into the Hall of Fame. For God's sake, he's done it all. And it's so overlooked. I think so overlooked that it's not even funny. And yeah, like you said, the man himself, Jim Johnston, maker of classics.
Now, if the name is not familiar to you, basically since a period in the 80s, there's been more or less one guy in charge of the entrance themes and a lot of the TV production music that's used on WWE television and pay-per-view, and that man more commonly known as Jim Johnston. Now, personally, I think, this guy is a legend. He's absolutely characterized what the WWE TV is today. Of course, you had those early days where perhaps the songs were maybe a little bit basic. The IRS theme tune was simply a cash register, and then Giant Gonzalez, very simple, but with those jungle sounds, it was very effective. But at some point, Jim Johnston had those handcuffs removed, and he was able to work with real commercial bands and bring that whole side of things into it. The use of real bands for entrance wrestler teams, that was one of the big factors that brought me back, the rock and wrestling and the entertainment side of it.
It was a big step for them to take, and I think they did it in style. But he has come on. I don't think he's actually come on leaps and bounds. I think he always just had it, but probably what he was equipped with at the time. A lot of that stuff fairly basic with the drum machines and sounds. I think the Rockers' original theme tune comes to mind. But again, classics upon classics. Coco Beware, Hakeem, you could just keep on firing them out. The Orient Express, I know you're a big fan of that one. Hacksaw Jim Duggan, even right around to the Warrior theme. I think that's a universal one where even now people, when they hear that riff, they just know it's Warrior time.
There is very little information about Jim Johnston on the internet. From everything I've read in interviews, it's a guy who's, I think, very humble. He's not ever present. You just don't see him around the place. Of course, you can catch the odd glimpse of him. In one of those documentaries, we have him putting together one of the best Jim Johnston classics. Undoubtedly, Break the Walls Down. I know there's probably others involved in that one, but I think he's shown actually putting that one together in one of the documentaries.
That's right. Break the Walls Down is a classic example, as you say, of a classic Jim Johnston song. I think it was a genius move to have that countdown and tie it in with the Millennium when Y2J debuted. What a way to get a guy over. And smart thinking. I think it was Jericho's idea, but the music itself, direct from Mr. Johnston himself, and we've had a few variations of this theme. I think the original one is probably my favourite still. Just got the juice.
Jim Johnston is a musician who's been in bands, but at some point, as I say, he met Vince and basically became the head of music for WWE. Now, as I say, it was a very kind of a basic remit in the early days. You had those simple theme tunes, and at some point then they decided to liven it up, and they really did start pushing excellent commercial tie-ins, as I say, with real bands. But focusing for a bit on that older era, one of my all-time favourites has to be that classic saxophone laid back number, the Rick the Rock Model Martel theme tune. I mean, this is a guy who knows what he's doing.
That is a classic, the old Arrogance. I really like the Rick Martel theme tune, I have to say. I mean, to put music to a character like that, even if they had some sort of blueprint, I'm sure you'd scratch your head. Like I'm sure with many, Del Rio comes to mind as well. I think that one is a very underrated. But yeah, getting back to Martel, it's classic stuff, and he doesn't, just stick within, I suppose, a rock kind of stylings of drums, guitars, and bass. Really thinking outside the box. Even stuff like Haku. I know it's It's a bit of a, I suppose, cliched one, kind of similar to Daniel Bryan. But, I mean, to stick him with the workers, Rick Martel's music was a classic, and I think a lot of superstars from that era, another one comes to mind, Ravishing Rick Rude. I mean, that's a classic theme for a guy like that. I think that got him more heat than probably 99% of the roster in those days. And then, of course, you had their tag team classics, I suppose what was called the Legion of Doom in their WWE run. Very underrated team. And of course, you can hear Hawk screaming his old classic saying at the start of that one. And of course, this year they will be inducted into the 2011 WWE Hall of Fame.
That's right, LOD in this year's Hall of Fame, so why not Jim Johnston? I hope at some point they're going to consider him. Pete Rose is in there, Drew Carey's going in there this year. Put over one of your most talented backroom guys. I mean, where would we be without entrance music? And the likes of the new Tyson Kidd theme tune, what a rocking song that is. Let's not forget about all those pay-per-view theme tunes. I mean, it's funny, but we've had bands like Kasabian on WWE pay-per-views back at Cyber Sunday a few years back, and it was genius. And I think another Vince work of brilliance. Whoever thought that you could actually bring real bands into this environment? I mean, they probably had to rely on some of those early theme tunes and just hope for the best, but now everybody gets something a bit special, and I always love when you have perhaps maybe a Randy Orton theme tune. Now with those, you've got songs from albums, so you'd wonder, maybe is it just Jim picking them, or does he co-create?
That's a good question. I'm sure it's probably depending on the character that's in question. I think when it comes to somebody like Orton, I'm sure there's a pecking order for the big songs and the heavy hitters, just like there is in the modern pop world, I think, with your Aguileras and your Spears. I know there was a bit of heat with one of those songs. I think one of them can't remember what song it was, but one of the big hits, and the other wasn't too happy about it. I'm sure it's the same case with an Orton or maybe a Ted DiBiase, but I think for the most part they nailed it. I don't think there's any that are too far removed from the character. And I think on the show we did speak about Cody Rhodes' theme and how we wondered why it had to change. But again, one step ahead of us as usual, the WWE, and for the better. As we said last week, it can't be the big old smoke and mirrors, glam rock stylings when you've got a guy like Cody Rhodes with that mask. Just doesn't make sense anymore. So always on the ball, Jim Johnston.
Cody Rhodes' Smoke and Mirrors is one of my favourite theme tunes of the modern era. You mentioned there it's been recently changed. You have to think that maybe it got popular and he decided it needed a rework. They knew what was good in terms of what they saw on TV, and they decided that one needed a remix. It seems like a bad thing at first, but actually to give it more attention is actually a good thing. They care about it, and that they care about Cody Rhodes.
And they care about us, more importantly. I think at the end of the day, it creeps you out, that team. I think it was a nice change to suit the new Rhodes gimmick.
Now I'm hoping for a new WWE The Music album. The last one was Amazon exclusive. I think a download only. Previous to that, you did have it on CD, but unfortunately year after year, I think that one maybe suffers a bit in terms of the sales. There's something wrong, because it should have been announced by now that the new music album would be out. But let's hope for the best. And of course, that's another thing to say, that if you've ever bought one of those music albums, then the man more or less entirely responsible for putting that together. You're never going to see much of him on TV. You will catch him in the odd interview or documentary, and even putting together that classic Break the Walls Down. Find him here on YouTube, and every time you hear one of those tunes, just think of the man that should be in the Hall of Fame.